Today, let's talk about channel strategy or what companies do in terms of going to market. So if you think about the four P's of marketing, which is product, price, place, and promotion, place, which happens to be distribution, is one of the most important ones because it's a long-term decision. Price and promotion you can oftentimes change on the fly, whereas product and place, which happens to be distribution, you oftentimes have to wait before you make changes. And it oftentimes also involves infrastructure investments. So let's look at channel strategy. Let me give you a sense for what channels are. It's a huge topic with lots and lots of research that's done in that topic, but let's at least get a sense for what channels are. So let's start with an example. Most of you know about Dell. Dell Computers has been one of the most successful companies that's used their own channel, which is going direct. If you look at Dell, they price their computers, and most of the Dell computers, and we talk about the 1990s, about 20 to 30% lower than IBM, which was their major competitor at that point in time, and they consistently did this. And this was possible only because Michael Dell, who was a 22-year-old UT grad who used his classroom assignment as a project idea that then got funding and became Dell what it is. What they did was they turned the whole business model on its head. So IBM till then invested in R&D, had a huge distribution channel, which happened to be that you would have retail stores that you'd go to, like Best Buy, that you'd pick up IBM from. But Dell said, let's go after a small segment of the market, which is experts who know what they want and what kinds of computers they need, and can configure the computers. And it was just catalog marketing. So just like you would order from a catalog of a finished product, what Dell said was you would put these together, and you would call up a 1-800 number and probably purchase this. And because they went direct, and so there was one service facility that would fulfill these orders that came in, and most of these experts knew what they wanted. They trimmed all the fat and all the money that they had to pay these intermediaries, and that they passed on to the customer as savings, which was why they were 20 to 30% lower. And they didn't invest in anything on R&D. They had Intel and IBM to look up to, and so that's how Dell was successful. You can probably think of lots of companies that have done similar kinds of things. So whether it's Amazon, whether it's other kinds of companies that have actually cut down on fat. So one of the things with this is that if your channel strategy picks up the right segment, prices it accurately, and goes after these customers that are fulfilled through the segment, then it's possible for you to make a huge profit. And Dell's example shows us that if you do choose these experts, most people would choose novices, isn't it? If you're going to retail stores, and what they said was, we don't need experts, we don't need salespeople to sell it to them, so they know what they want, and they can just tell us what they want, and so they identify the target perfectly. And obviously they had no advertising, and Dell's gone further. Dell was one of the first companies that actually had where you could configure most of these products online on your website. So they've gone from a 1-800 number to a website. Now it's been replicated over and over again by lots of companies that operate in this particular space. So what's the learning here? That if you do pick a channel, whether you want to go direct, in some cases Apple, for example, goes direct and also goes through retail stores, some of it which happens to be its own retail store, but also happens to be Best Buy and now Target and the university bookstore. So if I walk down to the University of Arizona bookstore, I can actually look at a small little setup that looks almost like an Apple store, a mini Apple store, if you will. So what kinds of channel coordination is required there? What kinds of conflicts come in? All of those we'll see a bit, but I think those are important things to consider. And I already told you that this is one of the most long-term impact decisions that a company can make in the product field. Services is slightly different, where you can on the fly make channel decisions, if you will. But let's get to the basics of why channels actually came up. So if you think about transaction cost analyses, let's assume that there are 4 different product manufacturers of milk, bread, shampoos and soaps. And there are three customers, so it's a stylized context, but the same could apply if you had a million. Instead of one, or if you think about 1 million customers, it would be the same. So C1 represents 1 million instead of 1. But let's assume that there are three customers in the market, C1, C2, C3. If C1 had to purchase all these four different types of products, milk, bread, shampoos, and soap, then they would have to have four transactions. So they would have to incur a cost, an effort cost, a travel cost in order to get these four items. And so would C2 and so would C3. So there are 12 transactions. So those lines that you see, there would be four blue lines, four red lines, and four green lines, and so forth. So you would have 12 transactions. Somebody has to bear the cost of these transactions. If it's a customer, then basically they have to pay for it by a price premium for the product. If it's a company, then they have to lower the profits. Okay? But let's assume now that if there's an intermediary in between. Okay? Then what happens is all those four manufacturers then supply to the intermediary, so there's four transactions there, and then the customers go to the wholesaler or the retailer and pick up the product. So there's three transactions there. So instantaneously with one intermediary, what have you done? You've gone from 12 transactions to 7 transactions. And so these 5 transactions that are savings, if you will, can be passed on to the customer as a cost, a price decrease, or can be for the manufacturer or for the marketer, a profit increase. So that's the basic for why you had distributions. Then this starts to get even more important if you start thinking about these four manufacturers in four different locations, geographies. So for example, north, south, east, west. So how can then the transaction cost starts to become extremely expensive, isn't it, for one customer to travel to each of these locations to pick those products up, if they have to fulfill them on a regular basis. Then if they don't do that, then if they hoard their item, then it becomes inventory carrying cost that the person has to do. So whatever be the transaction cost, there's savings to be done if you do have an intermediary. Okay, so that's where it all started. Okay, so let's stop here and let's figure